Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. We're going to give some time for folks to get in. We had a good group of you signed up for today's conversation, our finale conversation. So we look forward to welcoming you shortly. But we'll get started in just a moment. Alrighty, everyone, we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a great discussion planned for tonight. Some of you are still going to be joining us, so welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Amanda Decker, and I am the Senior Development Officer for Constituent Relations and Advancement Operations here at the USC Suzanne Dworak-Peck School of Social Work. And we're so happy to host this engaging conversation series with Dr. Renee Smith-Maddox. And tonight we are talking with Dr. Barbara Solomon and Dr. Simone Walton as part of Black History Month. If you have questions as tonight's panels or any technical difficulties that you might be featuring, please put it in the chat box. I'll help troubleshoot you. If you have any questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A feature. Don't be shy. But I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Ron Rubalcaba in admissions. Ron.
Thank you, Amanda. Before we get started with this wonderful discussion tonight, I wanted to take an opportunity to talk about some of the programs that we have here at the USC Suzanne Dworak-Peck School of Social Work. As Amanda mentioned, my name is Ron Rubalcaba. I'm the Assistant Director of Admissions and Recruitment for the on-campus program. So let's talk about those programs briefly. The first program I'd like to highlight is our Social Work and Juvenile Justice minor. The Social Work and Juvenile Justice minor is designed for students who want to increase their knowledge of the juvenile justice system and the various service environments for diverse youth populations. Now, this minor is fit for students in the behavioral and the social sciences, and for any student interested in developing a broad knowledge of issues in the field of juvenile justice. The minor is of particular interest to students wishing to pursue graduate studies in social work, as well as law, sociology, psychology, public health, or education. There are 4 required courses: institutional inequality in American political and social policy, juvenile justice in America, adolescent gang intervention, and community experience in juvenile justice environments. So if you're interested in that, definitely reach out to us here in the School of Social Work. Now, in addition to that program, we do offer the Progressive MSW program. Now, this is designed specifically for USC undergraduate students, and this program does allow USC students to earn both their undergraduate and a Master of Social Work in as few as 5 years. Undergraduate students who have completed or are in the process of completing the juvenile justice minor are highly encouraged to apply. Applicants who have completed the juvenile justice minor will complete less than the 60 units that's normally required for our traditional MSW program. We also welcome applications from other USC undergraduate students who may not be in the minor, who again complete less than the required 60 units for the traditional MSW. Now, in addition to that, we offer the Masters of Social Work in a number of formats to meet your needs, whichever those might be. Now, we do offer the Advanced Standing MSW program, and that's for those who have the Bachelor's in Social Work. It is a 37-unit, 1-year Advanced Standing program that does start in the summer. For fall applicants, we have the traditional 60-unit MSW program, and we offer that in a 2-year option or a 3-year option. That program offers courses in fall and spring only. You have your summers off. It does include 1,000 hours of internship at 2 community-based internships in year 1 and year 2, or years 2 and 3 if you're in the 3-year program. Really excited to talk about the Working Professional MSW program. This is one of the newest programs that we have to offer here, and it's 7 consecutive semesters or 28 months. Again, it's designed for those who have to work full-time. You have guaranteed evening courses with a consistent schedule. Classes are always on Tuesdays and Thursday evening. You can plan your life around it over the next 28 months. It is a hybrid program, meaning that some of your courses will be on campus, a minimum, or you'll always have 2 courses on campus, and anything in addition to 6 units will be done online. You do complete 1,000 hours of internship like our traditional program, but in the Working Professional program, we'll use a combination of both virtual training as well as a community-based internship. We do offer a number of dual degrees here at the School of Social Work. We partner with the School of Law, Business, Gerontology, Public Health, Public Planning, Public Administration, and Nonprofit Management. Now, if you're ready to learn more about the social work profession, how you can make a difference in your community, to inspire, to empower, and to advocate for your community, for marginalized populations, then reach out to us at applymsw@usc.edu, or you can visit the website for more information. I'll put that information in the chat box as well as some useful links to connect you to those programs. Now, I would like to introduce Dr. Renee Smith-Maddox, clinical professor here at the USC Suzanne Dworak-Peck School of Social Work, and tonight's moderator. Thank you. Right on.
Thank you so much, Ron. Wow, there are so many exciting programs at the Suzanne Dworak-Peck School of Social Work. I'd like to sign on to a couple of them, but I got another role tonight. I am the host. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This has been an exciting month for us. We have had a series of conversations with change makers. And this is the last conversation for this month. There'll be others, but this month is a special month for us for a variety of reasons. It is known for us to be the time to think about Black history. Black history is 365 days a year. Black history is American history. And this is a time for us to really think about how this particular moment in time that we can connect with the various inspiring stories and work that African Americans have done in this country and in the world. You know, African American change makers, they are improving the world every minute of the day with their perspectives, their courage, their tenacity. They are living examples of servant leaders, social innovators, public scholars, advocates, and of course, social workers. They are the people who are getting into good trouble. You know, Black folks have been change makers, liberators, and thought leaders behind every movement. And it's time to recognize their resilience, their wisdom, and their ingenuity. It's a time to celebrate and be inspired to action by the contributions of African Americans. This month, we laud heroes like Carter G. Woodson, John Lewis, Elijah Cummings, Shirley Chisholm, Marsha P. Johnson, Martin Luther King, Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison, Cicely Tyson, and so many others who came before them. And they all helped make this place, this world, a better place. Their courage and activism, they should serve as a call to action to all of us, not only this month, but every month of the year. You know, one of the things that all of the people that I've called forth and all of the people that you can think about, and some we may not know because they have not been in the limelight, but indeed they have been change makers. And they've been change makers because as African Americans, what they continuously have done is fight for the promise of equality on which our nation was founded. So we have a conversation tonight with some great ones, which I am honored, so honored to introduce you to. We have two change makers, and I'm going to start with Simone Walton, Dr. Simone Walton, a newly minted DSW. And she would like to use words like she's an international social strategist, a social unicorn. I'll let her work on telling you what that means for her, a therapist, a founder, and a visionary. She's a dynamic trainer. I can give you testimony to this. She's dynamic. And a guest lecturer with a wide and varied professional experiences, including her training as a paralegal and counselor, as well as extensive work in international humanitarian organizations. And she has lived on every continent except Antarctica. Wow. Dr. Walton is uniquely placed to function in her role as a therapist and social strategist within the international humanitarian sector. And she is the visionary and founder of Core Issues, which the time has come for that particular work that she's doing with individuals, communities, and organizations. Because in that work, she's applying solutions to large-scale social challenges affecting vulnerable and marginalized populations. So what a treat to have you, Dr. Walton. And we're going to hear more about what you are up to in a minute. Our next guest, I have to say, she has many roles. And one of the roles I'm going to say, I say she is my mentor. She is my role model. She is my soror. And Dr. Barbara Solomon, she has been doing the work, the real work for a long time. She joined USC back in the 60s as a member of the social work faculty. And, you know, she has come to us and has helped us understand the sort of road we have traveled around activism and the fight that social workers have been leading with regards to poverty and to end it and to push for civil rights. You know, for many decades, she has helped us understand the importance of really thinking about empowering our Black community. And, you know, I'm reminded of her great work that she published in 1976. And if you haven't read it, you want to get a copy because Amazon has it, Black Empowerment, Social Work in Oppressed Communities. And one of the things that we're going to get to highlight is to fast forward and tap into that conceptual framework and see how it's guiding social workers today, or how can it. But welcome, welcome, ladies. And I want to also say that Dr. Solomon is a graduate of HBCU, Howard University. And you heard me reference her as soror. And the reason why I did, because it's so appropriate to recognize Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, which is one of the oldest African-American female sorority in this country. And their motto is to serve mankind and to serve them well. So welcome, ladies. I had to give you a proper introduction. So let's kick this off. And Dr. Solomon, Black History Month, you've seen a lot of them. What does Black history mean to you?
Well, I think you've really said it all when you pointed out that it is American history. And it is embedded in American history. And I think it's so important to me because I have experienced the interlocking and the embedding of Black history in all of my educational experiences, actually starting in the segregated public schools in Houston, Texas, when I tell people we had to learn 3 anthems. We had to learn the Star Spangled Banner, the Eyes of Texas, and the Negro National Anthem. We had in those segregated schools teachers who really cared about us and were determined that we all would make history. And I left there to go to Howard University, which again was a diverse institution. I found the Black diaspora with the students from the Caribbean, from the newly independent countries in Africa. I even found the Jewish faculty who, when they came from the Holocaust, found anti-Semitism in the United States, and the only place they could get good jobs was in the HBCUs. So I had the chairman of my psychology department was a Jew. So diversity was embedded there. And we learned about all of those who had made it possible for us to achieve. We learned Black history. We learned who our forefathers and foremothers were. And I left there to go to UC Berkeley. Here I had a prestigious public university that I only knew about because my cousins had been coming there to work in the industry when the World War II. I didn't know how prestigious it was, but social work was what I wanted, and social work was what I got at UC Berkeley. There were only 3 African Americans in the 100 first-year students that year at UC Berkeley. So, and then I got my doctorate from USC, another prestigious university that I found there a lot that I could learn about how to deal with systemic racism on and off campus. So I think the Black History Month is absolutely essential in my life because it does remind me that I can still learn and I can still advocate for to change what we have had to experience in this country.
Ooh, the work continues. Well, Dr. Walton, could you please let us know, what does Black History Month mean to you?
So, I mean, for me, Black History Month is also American history, but it is leaning on the wisdom of our elders and moving forward their agenda. So it's really exciting for me to be part of a panel with Dr. Solomon. I too am a Howard alum. And I remember when I was deciding on, where to go for undergrad, I could have gone anywhere, right? And I specifically said to my parents, to my father, I said, I need to go to Howard University. Why? Because I wanted to experience Black history. I wanted to learn from people and about people that I had read about. This university was moving and so much forward. And it really instilled so much passion and joy for working with vulnerable and marginalized populations. And it was interesting, right? Because for me, while being at Howard, I was doing legal studies and communication, right? Social work was not on my radar at the time, but little did I know I was always being prepared to be an international social worker and social strategist. And so for me, after I left Howard, I ended up doing my MSW at Boston College. But before I went to Boston College, this panel is so exciting for me. I met a woman named Barbara. And she was a social worker. And she said to me, Simone, you should be a social worker. Everything that you talk about, wanting to live and work overseas, there's this whole new area of social work, international social work, that's evolving, right? And talking about your passion about working with vulnerable and marginalized populations, really empowering them, really being impactful in political spaces, in social justice spaces. You are a social worker and you don't even know it. And now at the time, all I ignorantly knew about social work was child welfare. That's it. But as I did my research, right, as any good student should, I got more and more excited because here was an opportunity for me to truly be impactful in ways that I had thought about, and I kind of sort of understood, but I was learning, an opportunity to learn so much more. And really, Howard University, I cannot say enough how being at that HBCU launched me as an individual and someone who is passionate about really empowering and working with the community and getting to understand your community and being culturally humble about that understanding. So I can't say enough about being a social worker. And then it was at Boston College where I did my MSW that I came into the whole international space with social work and realizing that the issues that we were experiencing here as, right, Black people, African Americans in the United States of America, and being a child of immigrants, it was happening all over the world. And it may look different and manifest itself different, but there is so much as a social worker I could bring to that space. So Black history for me, it is American history, but it's a chance for us to move the agenda forward of some of those great minds that you mentioned earlier. And that's what we should be doing as Black people. We shouldn't stop, right? Our ancestors, our elders, they invested so much. And the expectation, rightfully placed, should be that we are going to honor that and go far above and beyond what they worked so hard, right? And put their lives on the line to do. So that's my Black History Month take.
Wow. Well, one thing for sure, it is clear to me how important the experiences you have, they become the places, the fertile ground for you to grow and to expand and to reach your fullest potential. Being in places and spaces that welcome you, that honor you, that inspires you, that motivates you. And I heard it, HBCUs, Howard University has done a tremendous job. And we also know Madam Vice President Kamala Harris also is a graduate of Howard University. And I'm just going to throw in the mix that I am also a graduate of a HBCU, Lincoln University
Oh, yes.
in Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
So these universities have been the anchor. These are the universities that have really helped develop the Black intelligentsia, the ones who are the change makers, and their work continues. And there's something that we all could learn from these HBCUs and how they educate and how they prepare their students for the world. But let's continue, ladies, and do a little deeper dive when we start to look at where the social work profession is. And Simone, you mentioned move the agenda. I'd like to touch on, a little bit before we get there. Could you highlight any of the projects that you're working on? Because, our audience is vast. They're doing a lot. We have prospective students, we have alumni, we have current students, we have faculty. But Barbara, could you let folks know what are some projects you're working on?
I'll start by saying retirement means that you don't have to work anymore. However, I sometimes feel that I'm working more now than I was when I was actually working. But at least I want to talk about a couple of things that are not quite exactly work. I live in a retirement community. It's a very interesting retirement community because it's sponsored by the Los Angeles Jewish Foundation. And there are about 200 independent apartments here, but it is crafted as a community. Most of the residents are way past 65, but extremely active in the world around us. Many of them have come not only from other parts of the United States, but also from other parts of the world because they wanted to be close to family after retirement and what have you. They are predominantly Jewish, I would say 98%. My husband and I are the only African Americans here, but I have been absolutely thrilled with the way they have responded to the movement of Black Lives Matter. And one of my cherished memories over the past couple of months is a whole group of residents from our community marching down Jefferson Boulevard with Black Lives Matter signs and horns were being pressed saying, wonder what these old Jewish people are doing marching down Jefferson Boulevard. But I think it is because of their real interest in what has happened to this country, and they come to that interest from various perspectives. Simone mentioned international welfare, social welfare, and I recall presenting at a conference in Israel. And at that particular time, I was not all that familiar with Jewish history or the religion. And in my presentation, I responded to something that came from the Bible. And some of the members came up to me, the Israelis came up to me and said, now that book that you were using as your reference, how would you feel if your book, someone took the first half out and published it in their book and then referred to that as their book? That was my real first understanding of cultural sensitivity. that as social workers, we need to be able to understand the cultures that we are existing in, communicating in, and so therefore we make mistakes. And that was a very important lesson for me. But I have continued to work with, here at Fountain View, they have every other Monday a meeting on inequality and what's going on, where they discuss literature, much of it that is recent, about what systemic racism has meant in this country. So that is one group of activities that I'm very much involved in. But there's also one from the past that I'm still involved in, and that's USC's Neighborhood Academic Initiative. I wrote the initial proposal for that project, and it has become a model for getting underrepresented children educated in four-year colleges all over the country. The Neighborhood Academic Initiative, when I first spoke to the provost about it, he said to me, now Barbara, USC is not a social welfare agency. And so if you get that started, you're gonna have to figure out how to fund it or it won't exist anymore. It was an interesting challenge, but I thought it was absolutely essential that if we were ever going to diversify our faculty, we had to start somewhere by getting these underrepresented students educated. And so therefore we needed to start early. So that has continued to be a very important project that I want to see continue.
And I'm just going to just highlight that one piece that you just was referring to, NAI. You know, from where I sit, it's one of the original pipeline programs. It had a very good understanding of if we want to start to have our colleges, our professions more diverse, we have to intentionally plan for it. But also we have to have this mindfulness of connecting with our community and where we're situated. And someone familiar in the audience, Kim Thomas Barrios, and I just want to highlight it, said that, you know, without you, Dr. Solomon, there would not be over 1,300 additional neighborhood scholars in South LA and East LA in college. And so what a significant contribution that I want to recognize, and your work lives on. Simone, shed some light on what you're working on and some of the lessons that you learn, and how do you see the connection between what your work is and its impact on the African American community?
So I'm a big believer that social workers should get involved in different spaces and in every space where possible. So I am quite politically active and involved. I'll share a couple of my projects. One is I sit on a citizens advisory board, and we deal with economic issues. We talk about healthcare issues, and how they affect the members of the community. And I live in a very diverse county. And of course, right, we have to think about underrepresented and vulnerable populations and how it looks different, and what can we do as a board to help move this forward. One of the conversations that with the Black Lives Matter movement that started, and it's a conversation they've been talking about for quite a while, and controversial when it comes to policing, right, and public safety. So I actually co-chaired a committee, again, in the political space in my county, having to do with looking at best practices around mental health and crisis response when it comes to policing and public safety, and really reimagining and making some very different type of recommendations to our local county executive. And that was really an exciting project because it was driven by community members. And we really led the process. I am a therapist. You mentioned in the introduction that I've lived and worked in international spaces. And my formal introduction, I would say, to being a social worker was working with refugees and asylum seekers. I continue to work in international humanitarian organizations and with them. So there's training around what policy and practice should look like in working with these populations. There's training on how to best work in international settings, right? And so the spaces that I choose to get in and be a part of, I think it's for social workers to really add value to those spaces. So when I think about our current administration, you mentioned our VP, yay, the real HU. I had to put that in. Right. You know, the Biden-Harris administration, there's a big focus on healthcare. There's a big focus on immigration, the economy, and these are all areas, right? The climate, these are all areas and spaces that social workers need to get involved in. One of my mentors who was really instrumental in him introducing me to working with refugees and asylum seekers and overseas, and just realizing how issues around the economy, housing, right? The climate, how they have created so much vulnerability for people all over the world, right? America's role, America's position as a global leader, as a change agent. These are all spaces that social workers need to get involved in. So from politics to public safety, just, you know, we are uniquely positioned as social workers because we understand how a person, right, how an organization, the whole environment of a person, how it really impacts and inform the whole environment of an organization, how it impacts and inform how things move forward, how the community, right, is impacted and affected. So I am a big advocate and proponent for social workers really getting involved in unique spaces. So that's some of my projects. And then you mentioned that I founded my own consulting company, which is called Core Issues, because often, right, the things you see on the surface, there's something more going on, right? Poverty, that's a core issue, right? And poverty may manifest itself in where people are exhibiting depression, anxiety, right? But the core issue is poverty. Housing insecurity, what's really causing that? A core issue is an insecure economy, an economy that's not stable. So I think social workers we have a responsibility, and we have a unique ability to get involved in these different spaces and really lead them. So that's what that's some of the things that I do. I also counsel individuals. I'm very big into the whole mind, body, spirit approach to things. You know, I work in spaces with social work, sports, right? Working with people that are influencers in sports. So I do a variety of different things. And my unique portfolio around law and tying social work together, it gives me just a unique perspective. And I love sharing that with people and inspiring other people that are getting into social work to do different things. We have a great opportunity to really be change agents, and that's what we should be doing.
Amen. I can't agree enough in terms of the vast entry points that we have coming out of this field. We can, and we are needed in so many spaces. Our skills are transferable in many ways, and they benefit individuals, organizations, and communities. You heard it, folks, you heard it, that our guests are intersecting in all of those areas. I want to touch on a little bit because as you were connecting with all the agenda, I would like to say, for the Biden-Harris administration, racial equity is one that is front and center. And I mentioned earlier the book that Dr. Solomon wrote back in 1976. I was just coming out of undergrad school at that point, 44 years ago. Black Empowerment, Social Work in Oppressed Communities. So, Dr. Solomon, I just want to give you some space to connect with that body of work that you gave us in its own time. And even now, I look at it as a piece of innovation, social change, innovation work. How do you see it being applied now and for the field?
It's very interesting because I actually had someone ask me if I had a copy of the book, and I did. And after it was returned to me, I said, maybe I should look at this a little now and see how relevant it is. And I was actually astonished at how relevant it actually is, because in fact, you recall though 44 years ago, it was mostly a black-white thing. I mean, between Black people being oppressed and white people being the oppressors. We have moved forward now to where we are absolutely seeing the multicultural issues, and that racism has been expanded in terms of our work, that we must actually be able to relate to multiple oppressed people. So I'm just as concerned about the Latinx, about the Muslims, about the indigenous people in our society, all of them who have experienced, because of their specific culture and race, the kind of disenfranchisement in this country. So they are not in the decision-making place where they need to be in order to fully reach their potential. So I have many things that I can think about in that book that are absolutely relevant now. This matter of cultural sensitivity, I know that if I am going to work in a Chinese community, I need to better understand something about that community. But the most important thing, I think, relates to what we are talking about in terms of racial justice and the agenda of the Biden administration. I fully expect that they will be looking for policies to help eliminate or at least reduce the racial inequity in this country. But all of our social systems are in fact flawed. So therefore, whatever we do for somebody may hurt somebody else. And I think as social workers, we have to be conscious of that, and so that we change the culture of our country to where if we propose a policy, we must also identify those who may be hurt by that policy, and include some mitigating inclusions to see if we can reduce that. So therefore, we're not always thinking about what's good for me or what's good for us, but what we're thinking about what's good for all people. And this is a culture shift. This is so, we are so polarized now because everybody is looking at what's good for me. I hope, I'm hope sincerely that what we are able to do is to consider the policies that are proposed in terms not only of who they help, but who they hurt. And I think this is the way we can begin to manage this oppression, because what now, if we propose something for that's going to help Black people, other people see that as oppression. That somehow when we are looking to improve the conditions of Black people, it means that they therefore are going to be hurt. And I think that this is something that social work is in a particularly appropriate place to deal with that, because it's been pointed out by both of you that we're everywhere. We are in all of these social institutions, and we were in the criminal justice system. Actually, when I was at Berkeley, we had a correction specialization in social work, which disappeared when the prisons started to be places where you actually did not consider rehabilitation, it was punishment. And so our corrections specializations found no place in that kind of correctional setting. So therefore, I think social workers are in business and industry. Social workers are in healthcare. Social workers are in education. They are all over the place and not always identified as such. But I think we are there, and we take our social work background, our social work skills into. When I became dean of the graduate school at USC, I found that I suddenly had various people coming to me to solve their problems that weren't in social work, but were in other parts of the university. And I had to identify. I said, wait a minute, do you want a dean or do you want a social worker? Let me know. Because I think our skills are transferable in those settings, and we need to be able to connect with those. So I am looking forward to much of what was in Black empowerment, where we were trying to deal with the fact that we felt so unempowered that we needed to see the positive kinds of things that I always said, we may not be the cause of our problem, but we definitely are going to be the solution. And so therefore we have the power to do this. And so I am looking forward to what happens with the new administration to see if some of these connections can actually be made.
Absolutely. And when I listen to you, I see the vital role that social workers play in helping to change policies, practices, processes, to be disruptive and to really think about what is this new system of equity that we can all benefit from and not sort of get stuck in the zero-sum game, you know, and move beyond it. And how can we help not only change those policies, practices, and procedures and processes, but how we can change the narrative and how we can change the best practices so that we are really addressing this issue of racial equity. Simone, jump into the conversation. What's on your mind? Tell us, share with us.
Yeah, I think it's so important how we change the policy. And in my different, again, something I do is write policy, right? And work with communities in implementing it. How is it really going to impact the community and the people that live in it? And I think it's very important that we acknowledge that our country is in crisis, but our country is experiencing several crises all at the same time. We have an economic crisis, we have a healthcare crisis, we have climate crises, right? We have social justice crisis. We have the issue of systemic racism that's never really been addressed in our country and embedded in policy and practice. And so social workers, again, uniquely positioned as, right? You know, Dr. Solomon was saying, it's like when these policies are being written, who's at the table saying, okay, they benefit this particular population, but asking questions, what about this? Have we thought about this? Is it really going to benefit, right, the population? What about any unintended consequences of this particular policy that may seem in the immediate to benefit, right, Black people, but what about down the road? What does it really do, right? How is it going to impact people that are in the Latin community? How is it going to impact people who are Black, but they may be LGBT, right? So we need to really think about policy and how it's implemented in practice. And so a unique role, again, for social workers to get involved in crafting policy and asking some of those hard questions. I think first and foremost, social workers, they're what I call two top qualities social workers should have. You should listen and you should ask questions. And that doesn't, it is the same across the board, whether you're writing policy, you're in a policy space, or you're giving the clinical therapeutic interaction. You've got to be able to listen and to ask questions, and to ask questions in a very culturally, I don't even use the word appropriate, it has to be culturally humble. Listen to the organization, the person that's across from you. Think about, okay, how is this policy? Because in our country, America, we say justice for all, freedom for all, equality for all. But what does that really look like in Detroit, Michigan versus Washington, D.C. versus Minnesota, right? You have to think about this policy in practice and not just give lip service to it, but actually go into those communities and hear from the people that they're not only experiencing life, but they're the ones doing life.
I love it. I love it, Simone. I'd like to ask you a question because I not only love it, I'm thinking about the conversation where we're listening, where we want to hear, we want to understand. And I usually think that one of the things that I'm constantly listening for is something I can agree with. So I can say, yes, that is right. But had you thought about this? I think when we can actually connect and say, I'm listening to you, I'm hearing you, and I can actually agree with some of what you're saying at least, so that at least you'll stay here with me as we go through this process. I think what you're saying is just great.
Both sides, and that is so important. So I cannot call you Barbara. I can't bring myself to call you that. So I'm going to call you Miss Barbara. I was barely born when you wrote that book. I read a book that I have since read and also has really informed my work and these areas of social work that I'm passionate about. Both sides have to listen to each other. And so it means that we as people of color, we as Black people, we have to listen to the other side, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable.
Yes.
And we are gonna have things that we are going to disagree on, but let's come and let's try to reason together. Now, if we start from that place, we can move a lot of this racial equity agenda forward. And it is happening in some spaces, and, right, some communities. But where we are really challenged is when everyone kind of just puts their stake in the ground and makes a decision not to hear you. So I'm already coming into the interaction with, I know what you're gonna say. I have heard this before and I cannot listen to you. It's very hard to move a conversation forward, especially on racial equity, especially on racial equity.
Yes, yes, yes.
And as I listen, one thing I am connected with is that we have to be open and receptive and adaptable to changing the way we do business if we really want to facilitate change.
Yes.
And I'm hearing from your experiences and the great work that you both are engaged in and have done, that if we're going to move to collective action, we have to learn from the past and be able to connect with the present. And that collective action is intentional. It has to be guided, but you have to be transparent and open and available. I want to shift gears because the chat box is very busy and our time is coming to a close. Amanda, could you pull out at least one question and let our guests respond.
Absolutely. So Candace writes, Dr. Solomon wrote an article that I found in the USC School of Gerontology that introduced the concept of transcendence and its importance to Black elderly. I found this article in 1973. I would like to hear what Dr. Solomon has to say about that concept at this time in our history.
Well, now that I'm there, I think I have learned an awful lot. Since then, I still believe in the concept. I mean, I still believe in the fact. I want to use a story because I thought I was really saying, for example, we shouldn't have a limit on forcing people to retire at 65. They should be able to work as long as they feel they are capable of doing this. So we shouldn't have forced retirement. And the director of the Gerontology Center, listening to me, said, "Oh, Barbara, okay. Now let's suppose you get on a plane and you're flying somewhere, and the attendant says, 'Oh, would you like to meet our 95-year-old pilot? How would you feel about flying with that pilot?'" I had to say, not so good, because at 95, there are things that could happen in an instant that you might not happen at 65. So just because he feels he can fly that plane may not be in the best interest of the passengers. And what it allowed me to think about here again was that as we grow older, we do more of what we really feel is important, what we really want to do, but we understand that there are those behind us who are coming along too, and who have just as much a right to feel the positive aspects of their existence as we do. And so therefore, it goes back to what we were speaking before, adapt, that we have to change over time. We have to change and find those good things that at that particular time support us. And connectedness is a very important part of that. The fact that you stay connected and can actually have that kind of conversation with those you care about and those you love, I think that's extremely important.
Thank you. Before we wrap up, I'd like to give you both an opportunity to leave the audience with some messages. And I would say whether it's, thinking about individuals who are considering a degree in social work, what messages to them, or any call to action for the field, whichever way this lands. And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Walton.
So I will say, if you are considering the vocation of social work, really do a self-audit. What is your intent for getting into this vocation? And if your intent is to want to save the poor and oppressed people, don't be a social worker. If your intent is to empower and uplift and walk alongside vulnerable, oppressed, marginalized populations and be a voice, add to their voice, then move ahead. The call to action for our vocation is to get in good trouble. Do something now, get into spaces where we are will be, should be change makers. Listen, ask questions, make others think, make them a little bit uncomfortable, and yourself probably uncomfortable. But that means that you are really supporting change and on the journey for change.
I would also, I would also like to add to that. I think that's wonderful. And I would also like to add to that. I think it's important that we understand that we don't have to use that, I'm going to use that cliche, reinvent the wheel. That there are organizations often interested in the same things we are. And the power is in the collaboration. The power is in our ability to add to what something has already started and we can actually support. So I think, and School of Social Work at USC started, I think, the first concept of integrated practice so that you just don't become a caseworker or a group worker or a community organizer. I think one of the things that I have for the profession is that we have to develop the kind of infrastructures so that when we're in a problem situation, all of those things are on the same page at the same time so they can support each other. And I say that because I experienced what happened in we had group meetings with families in a school project, and the toilets were overflowing. And so therefore, children were running home from school because they couldn't use the toilet at school. And for months, there had been questions to the administration of the school district. They said, well, you're on our list, and when we get to you, we will be able to do that. We will get there. Somebody was in community organization, said, hey, look, I know somebody who's on the 6 o'clock news. I want you to get some pictures of the toilet. Get it to me. I'm going to put it on the news. It was on the news. In 2 weeks, those toilets were fixed. And it had to do with the ability of those there in the situation to connect with someone who had the power to do something about it. And I think in social work, we have skills in all of those areas, and we need to be able to call on and connect those skills to make a difference. So that is what I think our call to action is.
Well, you heard it, everyone. Social workers have a role. We're advocates, we're activists. We have a role to empower communities and to actually see communities as assets and build on their assets, work with those assets, join forces with those assets. It's about building community. It's about collective action. Social workers have always been in that arena, and they will continue to be in that arena. We invite you to be part of the solution. And on that note, we are closing our session out. We want to thank you all for joining us. But I want to say it's been such a privilege and an honor to be in the presence of Dr. Walton and Dr. Solomon. Thank you for your messages. They will stick with me for a lifetime. Thank you, and good night, everyone.